Good afternoon, Essex County College family. This is the Virtual Cafe powered by Student Life and Activities. We hope you and your family are doing well during this time. Today's episode, number 41, Addiction and Recovery. Now, September is National Recovery Month. Personally, I've lost over a dozen friends to addiction throughout the years. But other than that, I am not qualified to speak on this matter. So lucky for us, we have a couple folks who are expertly qualified to speak on this matter today. The first of which is Mr. Victor Stolberg. He is a counselor from Essex County College's Student Development and Counseling Department. How are you today, Victor?
Great, thank you. Welcome, everyone. As Mr. Ott said, I'm Victor Stolberg. I'm a faculty member and counselor here. Been at this college 30 some odd years, and for a while, one of my roles was being the substance use coordinator. That's how I actually started at the college. I came here on a grant to do alcohol and drug prevention. I thought I'd stay 1 or 2 years, and turned out to be a whole lot longer. So right now I'm in student development and counseling as a counselor. So students, whatever their issues are, if they just want someone to talk to, if they need help in figuring out what classes to take, change their major. You know, we're in the middle of the fall semester. Yesterday we started fall focus classes. Registration's still going on for anybody who wants to add a fall focus class. And starting Monday, we start registration for our fall 2 classes, which start October 19th. The fall focus and the fall 2 classes, like the regular semester classes, all end around December 19th. And then we'll wrap it up and get ready for the spring semester. We do actually have addiction counseling classes. We have a whole cadre of students who want to become CADC, Certified Alcohol and Drug Counselors, and we have classes that cover the curriculum for that. And we have a large recovering population on campus. A lot of people aren't really aware of how many students in recovery are actively enrolled in Essex County College. We used to actually have 12-step meetings on campus every day of the week. AA, NA, we even had smoking meeting and an OA meeting for a while. So we have a large support network of people in recovery here at Essex County College. Unfortunately, COVID has really changed the world for all of us in lots of different ways. And some of those factors, COVID has exacerbated issues of addiction. People dealing with things like social isolation, job loss, unemployment, economic uncertainties, just stressors generally in life have really complicated issues for people that already had complicated lives due to substance use. Just in the last year, the overdose deaths in New Jersey, for example, have gone up 17%. You know, you all heard for the last couple of years about the opioid crisis, and that hasn't gotten any better. Even the uncertainty of addicts getting their drugs apparently has become less stable, leaving addicts, you know, even in more stress than a normal addiction process, as horrible as that can sometimes be. The opioid death rate just in New Jersey alone right now is killing about 10 people a day. COVID numbers have dropped a little even below that right now, but they're certainly not unrelated. So I'm just really sitting in on this section. Miss Haversham-Brown's really going to be the main speaker, but I'll be jiving in from time to time if people have questions or if I feel like interrupting. All right?
Thank you, Victor. We appreciate you. I know our students do as well. Thank you for that information. All right, moving on. We have an expert with us today on addiction and recovery. We have Miss Patricia Haversham-Brown, and the official, however you want to say this, is LCSW-CASAC-G/MT. Good morning, Miss Brown. Can you give us the definition or the meaning of what that stuff means, please?
I sure will. Well, because that got me a little confused. Good morning, good afternoon, or we're in the afternoon now. Good afternoon, all. I first want to thank Dr. Zoya and you all for having me. It is a pleasure. Addiction is my baby, followed by forensic population. A little bit about my initials. I am an LCSW in New York and in New Jersey because I work in both places. I'm also a CASAC, which is a certified alcohol and substance abuse counselor /G, because the gambling became very, very popular back during the time when I was going for my certification. And I wanted to learn more and do more in that field. And I'm also an LCADC in New Jersey. So the other stuff I'm a little confused on, but that's what it is currently, okay? We probably got some letters mixed up in there, and that's okay. Just briefly, a little bit about who I am and why I'm doing this. I have been a substance abuse counselor for probably longer than some of you are age. I've been doing this for 32 years. I started in substance abuse. I went from working as a substance abuse counselor to working with people who have HIV and AIDS. And at that time, we were making people comfortable to die. It was back in the days when people were not living with HIV and AIDS, and I'm so grateful today that we have come a long way, and people are living lots of years with AIDS. People that you would never imagine. Back then, you could almost look at a person and tell that they were sick. Today, we are past that, and I'm so glad. I'm glad about that. From there, I went to working back with the forensic population, people who had been incarcerated, who had HIV and AIDS, and who also presented with substance abuse issues. From there, I went to Fortune Society's Academy, and if any of you have never heard of it, please look it up. Fortune Society is awesome. They do a great deal of work with people coming home from prison. I ran a building called the Castle. It's on 140th and Riverside Drive. I worked with people that people were afraid to work with, people who had come home from prison after doing 40 years straight, 30 years straight, not seeing a breath of air except out in the yard. Inclusive of that was people who were trying not to go to prison. And the Academy still stands. It is fabulous. Anybody get a chance, please Google it and take a look at it. And you might be able to utilize it for some people that you know that might be coming home from prison and need a safe laboratory to live in. And I say laboratory because it's one of the places where you can make mistakes. You are not thrown out for the errors that you make. So I am on their board of directors now, and I'm an advocate of Fortune Society. From there, I went to CASES, which is where I am right now. I am the director of 3 intense mobile treatment programs. These are people who don't fare well in any other form of treatment. And I'm going to touch on treatment as we go into recovery. They just don't do well. And they are then sent by DOHMH. This is one of Mayor de Blasio's projects. It's a Safe Clients. And we have people there that, as I said, they're street homeless. Some live in shelters, some have congregate care, but all of them really, really are not doing well, and we work with them to try to increase their level of support, success, etc. So I think that's a little bit about who I am. I'm going to get started, and if we have questions, please, I don't know how you all do it, if you want to put it in chat or if you just want to ask, whatever works for you all. Different programs do things differently. I thought with addiction, I would start out with a definition. And addiction is the fact or condition of being addicted to a particular substance, thing, or activity. It is an urge to do something that is hard to control or stop. And as I heard Mr. Stolberg talk, it just reminded me of today's society and how with nothing else to do, it's easier to resort back to what we did before, even if we did have some clean time under our belt. The APA, the American Psychiatric Association, says that it is a complex condition or brain disease that is manifested by compulsive substance use, despite having harmful consequences. And I jotted some notes down because sometimes you don't want to forget something. So I said, let me make a few notes as I'm talking. So during the 18th century and the early 19th century, addiction was viewed as a sin. So progress has been made. Today, we accept the disease model. The origin lies within the individual himself. So what are some signs of addiction? One of the biggest ones is a lack of control or an inability to stay away from a substance or a behavior. It causes decreased socialization. And by that, we abandon our commitments. We ignore risk factors despite potential consequences. And when I think of that, I think of the heroin addict who, by history, has always been shooting drugs, sharing needles, not caring about the consequences of possibly having HIV or hepatitis C. And then I think about the addict who is smoking crack, who started out saying, I only freebase, and has gone down to the, as he would call himself, in the dredges of smoking crack, sharing stems sometime as short as 2 inches long. I've observed this. I've watched it. The stems are broken on the end. They're cutting their lips. Hence, we again run the risk of contracting other diseases. So what about the addictive gene? And this comes up to mention sometimes, and I will say that addiction has progressed a great deal since I started also. When I was in the field, OASIS did not accept the harm reduction model. If you were in a residential program and you used, and you were in an OASIS license program, you had to leave because you were using. Today, I'm so glad about that as well, that OASIS has now embraced the harm reduction model. So they've made positive steps also. So when we talk about the addictive gene, I think some of the reports say that 50% is attributed to genetic predisposition, and then there's a 50% that's attributed to poor coping skills. And I think about, as I was thinking about my own history, I think about my dad, who has been a workaholic all his life. He's gone on now to greener pastures, but he worked all the time. He was a workaholic, and he had the holic at the end of what I'm saying. And then I say, well, I have that predisposition to addiction, and I work like that. I'm a workaholic. So there is some genetic predisposition there. Dependence characterized symptoms of tolerance and withdrawal. And I used to hear people early on in the field talk about how they could drink 15 drinks and my tolerance is high, and not really realizing that's not a positive thing, that's a negative thing. It means that it's taking that much more of a substance for you to reach that euphoria that you want to reach. And one can have a physical dependence without being addicted in the moment. But please know the train is headed in that direction. So when we talk about addiction, I like to just mention some of the substance-related disorders. I'm sure you know them, but I'll throw them out there anyway. Alcohol, caffeine, cannabis-related, hallucinogens, inhalants, opioids and other stimulants, sedative, stimulant-related, which is your amphetamines and your cocaine, and tobacco. And I know a lot of people don't even think about caffeine as they could possibly have an addiction to it. I drink no more than 2 cups of coffee a day. I've had 2 days go by where wherever I was, I didn't get my coffee and I felt it. That is a strong addiction. I felt different. And then let's touch on tobacco. Oh my God. I look at these commercials and I swear if I smoked, I think I'd stop. They are putting some commercials on TV to help people stop smoking cigarettes. And guess what? It's not working. It is not working. But that, again, is the addiction to tobacco. I'll share with you my mom, who has also gone on to greener pastures, who had a serious tobacco addiction. My mom smoked at least 2.5 packs of cigarettes a day. She would be putting one cigarette out and she would be lighting another cigarette. And we tried so hard to help her see that it wasn't good for her. My mom had 2 heart attacks and 5 strokes before she passed on. However, tobacco, I remember, we'd go in the hospital and my mom would be in the hospital. She had had a stroke or had a heart attack and she was in the hospital. She would beg us to bring her cigarettes, and us being her daughters, we would bring 1 cigarette because we understand the addiction. And then I've seen my mom get up and we'd go into the waiting area, the visiting area where visitors can sit and smoke. I know they've changed all that in the hospitals now too, but my mom would pick up a cigarette butt out of the ashtray and smoke it. That's the addiction to tobacco. There's a serious, serious addiction. And if you have family members, don't beat them up. My dad used to get so upset with my mom. They never fought, but it hurt him to his heart to watch her smoking, thinking that she was damaging her lungs, which she was. But I will tell you that my mom did not die from that. She died from something else. But the addiction to tobacco it's hard. And I look at the commercials, the woman on TV with the hole in her throat, or, they can't make them any worse. And yet it's not working. It's not helping people stop smoking cigarettes. So let's talk a little bit about drugs. All drugs taken in excess have a common direct activation of the brain reward system, which is involved in the reinforcement of behaviors and the prediction of memories. The essential feature of a substance use disorder is a cluster of cognitive, behavioral, and physiological symptoms, which indicate that the individual continues to use the substance despite specific substance-related problems. The behavioral effect of the brain change may be exhibited in repeated relapses and intense drug cravings when the individual is exposed to drug-related stimuli posters. Let me give you an example. Let me give you two examples. Think about the person who has come home from prison, maybe. He's done 2 or 3 years in prison. He's made up his mind that he's not going to drink anymore, because while he was in prison, he was in some of those recovery programs, and he learned that it was not a beneficial thing for him. In fact, it was more of a detriment to him. And let's say he is an alcoholic, and he's walking down the street of his block, and it's 90 degrees outside. And what's up on the billboard? Miller High Life, Corona. These things are stimuli posters. That's what they are. And I think about that with the billboards and how people have tried so hard to stop using. And it's like we advocate for the use of and the drinking, not realizing the damage that it is doing to an individual. So I just want to briefly mention the DSM-5. We've gone from 3, 4, 5 since I've been in the field. And now when DSM is classifying ranges of severity, they look at mild to severe when they're looking at addiction. And it really depends on the number of symptoms, if you ever have a chance to look at your DSM-5. And if a person presents with 2 or 3 symptoms, the DSM-5 says that their classification is mild. And if they present with 4 to 5 symptoms, their classification now has become moderate. And if their classification becomes severe, it's 6 or more symptoms. And this is usually used if you're working in the field with clients. And so I'm just giving you a little more information. You might not even need some of this. But we should know that the severity can change across time. And it's reflected by the decrease or the increase in the frequency of use. And if I'm going too fast, slow me down because I talk fast. So let's talk about your work, and then maybe those who are in the field who have had assessments done, or if you're in the field and you're doing assessments on clients. There's several different ways that you're going to look at the client's use. You're going to look at how the client self-reports. That's important. What do they say? And what's so interesting is you have the opportunity to get 2 different clients. I remember that client that just wanted to boast and wanted me to know how much heroin he could use. And I sniff about 15 bags a day. Don't know why, but that was his presentation during our session. And then that client who says, I really don't know why I'm here. I really only just smoke a little bit of marijuana. I don't know why they made me come here. So you'll get different self-reports. So then you say, well, who do I believe? Where am I going with this? So then you can go by the report of the knowledge of others. If you're doing family therapy or the family member's part of the session, you can ask the family member with a consent if they're willing to share some information about your client as well. And then you have your eyes. What does your clinical observation say? Your client's coming in to see you, and one day he just doesn't look so great. Your clinical observation is important. And then don't forget biological testing. We have urine toxicologies, we have mouth swabs, we have blood work. You may get that client who swears that, I don't know where you got this urine tox from. It is wrong. I did not use. And I will say to you that that is a possibility. Anything man-made has possibility of error. So it could be that that urine tox is wrong. Maybe where you're working, they have some that are too old, they've expired, or something is amiss. The test is wrong. What I've always done with my clients is send them to the hospital to get blood work. You can't fool the blood work. The blood work says what's in your system or not. So just be aware of that. And also, how do we define where our clients are that we're working with? Well, some of them might be in early remission. Some might be in sustained remission. Some might be on maintenance therapy, and that's medicated assisted treatment. And some might be in a controlled environment. So I want to touch on the medicated assisted treatment for a second. When I was in the field early on, there was a lot of pushback about methadone. Suboxone wasn't even on the table yet, but it was methadone. And there was a lot of pushback. And I heard the gentleman, Mr. Stolberg, mention self-help meetings. I remember when if you went to an NA meeting and you said you were on methadone, they didn't invite you, they didn't welcome you in the meeting because they considered that you're still on drugs. Well, hence, no, they are on medicated assisted treatment. And there are people, and if anybody lives in the city and you want to see that person on medicated assisted treatment that is not doing it the right way, you go by 125th Street and Park Avenue. Back in the days, we used to call that spitback zone. And if anybody doesn't know what that is, people would take methadone, go to the methadone program, get their methadone, hold it in their mouth, spit it back into a bottle, and come outside and sell it to people who wanted it. This is real. This stuff is so real. But then there are people, and I assure you, that work a 9-to-5 job every day who are on methadone and who are taking their methadone properly, and they are living a normal life like you and myself and somebody else out in the field. So it's, you know, it's the reality of it. And then along came Suboxone, and that is the same type of medicated assisted treatment. And these things are working. I will say there are people who have overdosed on methadone. There are people, so we have to be aware of the reality. But when we look at the whole gamut, it is not doing a lot of damage to the population who have an opioid addiction and they want to stay clean, and so they're using methadone or Suboxone. So then I mentioned in a controlled environment. And when I say that, I'm thinking of a treatment facility, clients who are in residential drug treatment programs. I will add to that controlled environment incarceration, but I will tell you that drugs are in the jails and drugs are in the prisons. So, and it's a sad thing, but it's a reality. So when we say I stayed clean, I was in a controlled environment, I was incarcerated, that's not a guarantee, okay? So I think that's kind of where I wanted to go with addiction. Zoya and I talked and I was trying to not do more than 10 minutes. I didn't want to take up too much of everybody's time before I went into recovery. Any thoughts, any ideas, any suggestions, or should I just move on to recovery and then we'll open the floor? What are the presenters, what do you all suggest?
Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Haversham-Brown on addiction so far? You can put it in the chat. Or you can...
Yes,
okay.
I have a question.
Go for it.
Could she repeat the three ways of, she was talking about if somebody has so many symptoms, it would be mild addiction, so many symptoms, medium, so many symptoms, severe. Could she repeat that, please?
Glad to. So this is just the way the DSM-5 classifies severity. That's what it is, the range of severity. So as you look in the DSM-5, you're looking at the different symptoms that are presented. If they have 2 or 3, they're classified as having a mild severity. If they have 4 or 5, you're now classifying them with moderate severity. And if they have 6 or more, it is severe. Does that answer you?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
No problem. And just remember that it can shift. It doesn't always have to stay there, okay, at that range that we classified them first. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Surely. Mr. Stolberg.
One point about tobacco. Nicotine dependence is one of the areas actually that the addiction field has been highly successful in. Back when I started, like when you were mentioning you started in the field, about 50% of adult Americans were nicotine dependent, smoking every day, regularly. Here on the campus, people used to smoke in classrooms. Instructors would smoke, students would smoke. People would smoke in the elevator. You'd have to hold your breath to get off. I mean, I made a lot of enemies when I got the campus to go smoke free, and actually had to get a copy of the law to get the president at the time to agree that we really should not have people smoking on campus. But nowadays, the average adult pop report is about less than 22%, 21% of adult Americans are smoking, compared to over 50% a couple decades ago. It's one of the areas where addiction prevention and treatment really has been highly successful. A lot less people are smoking. So no, it's not 100%, still people are using, but reality is, and it's still the #1 drug killer, no dispute about that. Average reports each year around 450,000 deaths related to nicotine dependence. But the reality is fewer people are smoking now compared to a few decades ago. It's an area where really prevention and treatment has been, it's one of our victories. We've been very successful in that. You also mentioned the bulletin boards, the signs, the signs out on the highways and stuff. Last summer, I took a family trip out to California, driving through some of the western states. I was so horrified by the amount of marijuana signage. I mean, there's a ballot issue coming up at the next election. As an addiction professional, let me say, I hope we do not go towards legalization. There's the whole social justice issue we can talk about, but I'll tell you, history convinces me, the more available any substance is, the more people will use and abuse it. And if we have marijuana, cannabis more readily available, more people will use and abuse it, and we'll have more health problems as a consequence. Enough of it. Sorry, but those are just a couple points that I wanted to throw out there.
Glad to hear them. And let's not forget, Mr. Stolberg, as we're talking about the tobacco smoking, let's not forget vaping. I have clients in New Jersey who actually think that they're doing better by vaping than smoking cigarettes. And I'm trying to help them see the amount that you are inhaling supersedes what you would take a puff of a cigarette. But this vaping is very, very dangerous too. And that's another thing they're pushing. I'm even looking at it on TV. They got all the different colored vapors. I mean, we're not giving a good message out.
Industry is behind these changes. The vaping craze, the cannabis legalization industry is poised to make a lot of profits, hoping that cannabis does become legal. Vaping, certainly the doses are off the charts. Marijuana is the most widely used illicit substance among college students in this country. The estimates are something like 1 out of 22 college students uses cannabis daily or nearly daily. But there's also a big misperception. When you ask college students, do they think if their peers are smoking cannabis, about 85%, well, students report, but they think about 85% of their peers are, well, really the actual incidence is about 18%. So there's a common misperception everybody's doing it and everybody's not. But if we do make it more legal, more people will, and we will see in a decade or two, just like it took a few decades for tobacco damage to be evident, the cannabis damage, the health consequences will be catastrophic. Short term, we'll start seeing more psychiatric issues, and long-term use, we know depression, schizophrenia, and other psychiatric illnesses will become more prevalent. Enough of a soapbox. I'm sorry, but
that's okay.
These are issues that we have to wrestle with. There's no quick, easy answer when you talk about addiction and recovery.
You're right. You're so right.
I just wanted to add, how's everybody doing? Jamil Graham, Director of Student Life and Activities. There is a question in the chat, and it kind of goes to what Victor was stating. So maybe one of you all can answer it. Someone put, I think the bigger question begs to ask why people resort to usage of these drugs. Is there a link between mental health and dependency that can lead to perhaps overdosage, etc.?
I think that's a broad answer, and I'll defer to Mr. Stolberg after I make one comment. I don't think there's any one reason why people use substances. And I don't think it's all mental health. Some start out, it's fun. Remember, if you can remember back in the days, I don't know, maybe I'm dating myself, but we started out, we had a little joint at a party and you laughed and, this was back in the days, but this is not even the same marijuana that's out there now. We're talking about all this man-made stuff that's out that people are continually putting more substances in to make it the better seller so you get the better feeling. So I don't know that there's any one answer. I really don't. I don't think there's one answer. Let me put it that way. I think some is hereditary if you do have that predisposition, but it's not all. It's not. There's not the one answer that we can say for that. And I'll defer to Mr. Stolberg to answer as well.
I certainly agree with Patricia's comments. There is no one answer. The whole misunderstandings around genetic predispositions are much more complicated. And there's no such thing as an addictive gene. Let's just put that to rest. There's predispositions. In terms of risk populations, clearly there are many groups that are higher risk than others. I just read an article last week about college students with disabilities being at much higher levels of substance use risk. People with other underlying mental health problems, we've known for years about, we used to call it double trouble, dual diagnosis. Yes, psychiatric patients, schizophrenic patients are chain smokers. There's very few that aren't. So the neurochemistry, the brain stuff that Patricia was talking about, how our brains function biologically, the neurochemical messengers that neurotransmitters are produced naturally in our brain, and drugs, psychoactive drugs, mimic these chemicals. So when they get introduced into our brain, they produce reactions, and that's part of the pathology that leads to dependence and addiction.
And I don't think anyone starts out saying, I want to be an addict. I want to be addicted. That's not what happens. Any other questions before we move on to recovery?
Any other questions from anybody? Go ahead, pop it in the chat, ask it out loud, raise your hand, whatever you want to do.
Hello, my name's Robert. How are you today, everyone?
Hi, Robert.
Hey, Robert.
I'm actually one of your Next Step students here at the college, and I am incarcerated at the moment. I've spent the last 8 years in the prison system, and I can agree, yes, there are drugs in the prison system. I went into prison myself, addicted, and found recovery through the 12 steps. But what I have noticed is, as you said, ubiquitous presence of Suboxone in the prison system, not all of it being used in the proper way. And I see, I'm about to be released, and the prison actually tried to put me on Suboxone before leaving, knowing that I have been 8 years clean. And they're actually trying to push this on people who are spending years clean in the system. I've seen a lot of my friends who are on this with no intention of ever getting off it. They've just been convinced that I have to be on this the rest of my life. That's the only way. And I'm wondering is there a protocol? Is there a means to the end with the Suboxone program? How long should a person be on this before they can face life on life's terms? Is there a blanket policy? Do people wean down, or is this something that the clinical staff thinks that some people will just have to be on indeterminately?
I can only say that I do not have a definitive time of being on it, and I'll go to Mr. Stolberg after that. I think of methadone, the methadone program, where some were on it for life and others were on methadone with the goal to reduce and come off of it. So my guess is that Suboxone would be the same, but I'll go to you, Mr. Stolberg.
Well, the history of these substances is they were created and designed not for lifetime permanent use, but for short-term tapering off of the illicit substance and gradually reducing the doses so that people would be able to get clean and free without them. That was the intent, the design of both methadone and Suboxone as they were created. When they get out into the treatment community, the more clients you have on your rolls, the more you can get reimbursed from insurance companies. There may be a financial disincentive to unenroll people, but reality is a decent treatment program should be encouraging their clients not to stay on any substance for the rest of their life, but to learn, as you said, Robert, very eloquently, deal with life on life's terms.
That's right.
And that does not necessarily necessitate taking another substance. By the way, I just heard a little radio report, just in case, since we are talking about some of these serious opioids. Those who may be around people that are using and abusing, CVS is going to be giving away free naloxone samples beginning Thursday for the next. So it's just a lifesaver. It's all it is. It's not a light. It's another medication, an opioid antagonist that if somebody is in danger of overdosing, perhaps you can prevent that. Just a little plug, not for CVS.
Good. Mr. Chiosi, am I pronouncing your name correctly? I want to thank you for sharing that what you shared. I wish you the best when you come home. Keep following what you're guiding, what you're saying. And I will say, if you're ever in New York, stop up at Fortune Society. There's a wealth of people there looking forward to providing support for people coming home from prison. So I just wanted to throw that out to you. And thank you for sharing what you did.
Thank you very much.
Sure. And Mr. Stolberg mentioned something you said. I thought about it the last minute. I lost the train of thought. That's what happens when you get older. I'm sorry. It'll come back.
Esther's been raising her hand a while.
Oh, okay. Please.
I'm directing my comment and question to Mr. Stolberg. You were talking about the decrease of tobacco use, which I'm an ex-tobacco addict.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the use of tobacco has decreased in the United States for a number of reasons. One is the campaign against smoking. One is the tobacco companies not advertising on television anymore, and a number of other things. But as an immigrant, I think globally, it may have, but the tobacco companies, what they did was they went to the so-called third world countries, and I'm from one of the so-called third world countries, and the use of tobacco has increased exponentially. True. I was in Bangkok a few years ago, and I saw 8-9-year-old kids addicted to tobacco. The same thing in Africa. So I would appreciate it if these are mentioned, because all lives matter, not just American lives. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you.
Yeah, the research on that is so clear cut. Yeah, I've written a couple of articles on tobacco. It's just, in this country, we were able to reduce the use through broad brush, unified, no one answer, no one strategy, no one solution. Passing laws, increasing taxation, eliminating advertising, having self-help, having nicotine replacement available, having insurance. It took many, many different approaches, but it was overall successful. It's really a victory for in this country. And it's so, Esther is really on point. The exportation of the tobacco industry to other countries should be criminal, but technically it's not. The use in Southeast Asia is off the charts, and all the lung cancer rates in those countries now they're just escalating astronomically. And each country has to set its own restrictions and barriers to deal with these kinds of issues. I mean, there's no country anywhere that does not have some substance use issues. People have been using and finding out they can abuse substances as long as there have been people. In fact, there's even studies of non-humans, animals, who, when they can find a substance that will get them high, they'll use it and get high. And it's been part of human history as long as before people were people. But the economic motivation behind some of these companies to export their products is very substantial. And I do fear the cannabis industry is poised to rape the American public economically, and the health consequences, it'll take a while to be visible, but they will come.
I agree. Okay, so if there's no more questions, we'll move on to recovery and talk a little bit about that. Oh, wait, there's a question. Why is tobacco and alcohol legal, but cocaine and marijuana are all considered illegal? Interesting. Well, there was one time when alcohol was illegal, if you go way, way, way back when. So I can't answer why. It's just where we are in this country and the system. What do you want to say about that, Mr. Stolberg? Why?
Well, it's our history. I mean, it's part. Yeah, the United States government was founded on tax revenue from
Alcohol.
George Washington was the largest distiller during the colonial era.
Yes.
He on Mount Vernon, he had a large distillery, and when the U.S. government was first created, the number one source of tax revenue was alcohol. Distilled spirits. In fact, the first time the Army was called out against Americans was the Whiskey Rebellion, because people didn't want to pay, moonshiners didn't want to pay their taxes.
Okay.
So we have a long, long history of tobacco in the U.S. Congress. I mean, the Congress is decorated with tobacco images. You can still, when you walk into the Senate today, there's still our snuff boxes. Snuff is available for anybody going into the chambers, because since smoking is now illegal inside. So we have a long, dirty history with alcohol and tobacco. It's just, and we don't have as long a history of coca and cannabis. So there, but I will say, again, the availability of a substance is directly linked to its level of abuse. So the more we can keep stuff from becoming readily available to people, the less people will try, and the less people will become addicted and dependent.
Good point. Okay, so recovery. Let's start out the same way we did abstinence and start out the same way we prior did addiction and say, what is recovery? Well, it's a process. It is not an end state. It is a series of steps a person takes to make life better on multiple dimensions. And those dimensions are physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. How do we reach recovery? Well, we got to start out somewhere. And so we start out with abstinence. And that's a necessary first step in learning what to do to get and stay healthy in all areas of life. And then we move to sobriety, which is abstinence plus a return to full physical, psychological, social, and spiritual health. Sobriety is living a meaningful and comfortable life without the need for substances. Sobriety is more than just healing the damage, but abstinence is the beginning of sobriety. It's the ticket to get into the movie theater, but it's not the movie you're going to see. Recovery is a developmental process. It's a gradual effort, and it's a way to learn new and progressive, more complex skills. So whoever you read and whoever you listen to, you get different stages of change when it comes to recovery. The first one that we always hear about or read about are the 5 stages of change, which is the pre-contemplation. I'm not really sure if I want to stop. I hear you telling me about it, but I'm not sure. And then the contemplation stage, well, you made some good points. I might think about this. I might give this some thought. And then the preparation. Well, if I'm not going to use, I got to throw away all the alcohol in my house, or I got to get rid of the drugs that I have with me, or I have to stop being around friends who are using. That's my action stage. Now I got to really do something about this. And then my maintenance stage. I got to stay clean. I got to figure out ways to stay clean, and what do I need to do? Now, NIDA talks about stages of treatment in a different way. They say initiation first, then the early abstinence, then the maintaining abstinence, and then the advanced recovery. I don't know if any of you all have ever done any reading, but Terence Gorski is the guru of relapse prevention. I started out reading Terence Gorski when I first got into the field. And he talks about 6 stages of recovery. He says transition is stage 1. You got to give up the need to control the use. Then he says comes stabilization. We have to recuperate from the damage we've done, both internally and externally. Now, your early recovery is your internal change. That's your thinking, your feeling, and your acting when it comes to drug use. Your middle recovery is your external change. That's you repairing the damage done and developing a balanced lifestyle. And then Terrence talks about late recovery, growing beyond our childhood limitations, and maintenance is balanced living and continued growth. So how do we recover? Well, one thing we have to remember is that one shoe doesn't fit all. And I've been working with counselors, I've been training counselors, and I've been trying to help them understand that what worked for John, who you saw yesterday, is not going to work for Betty, who you're seeing today. So don't try to put the same methods of treatment and recovery on her. What avenues then are open for you and your client if you're working with clients? And if you're not, just for your knowledge of them. So I think this also before you all's time, Synanon was out in California, was a therapeutic community. I have never, ever, ever in my life been in favor of therapeutic communities. I have the belief and the thinking that when you go into treatment, you are so broken. You're broken all around. And therapeutic communities were geared to break you down more. I remember one, they had you walking around. If you cursed, you had to walk around with a toilet on top of your head or a bag of garbage. I have a garbage mouth. I just don't feel that that sort of treatment works best. Now, that's just my opinion. Other people might feel differently. I noticed that the therapeutic communities today have changed enormously. They're providing more education, more skilled clinicians. Many, many years ago, if you wanted to be a counselor, all you had to do was say, I've been there and I've done that. I used to use drugs. I want to be a counselor. And you became a counselor. But you didn't have all that you need. You had the hands-on. Okay, I'll give you that. But you didn't have all the education and stuff that yet you need today also. So the inpatient programs have changed tremendously. So you might have a client that you feel they've relapsed, they can't stop using. First thing you say is, I'm gonna put you in a residential drug treatment program. Just for me, I don't start with residential. That's just for me. Everybody has their own perception. There's something called outpatient program. What about that person who it's partial hospitalization? They could go to the program during the day, and then in the evening, maybe they go to a halfway house or they go to some kind of sober house to stay in, or the person who goes to treatment after work. They go to work during the day, they still need some treatment, so then they attend a night outpatient treatment program. And then as Mr. Stolberg mentioned, and these are my babies, self-help meetings. I love self-help meetings. I stand by them. There's Overeaters Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous, Alcohol Anonymous. There's all kind of self-help meetings. I think they get a bad name. I don't know, because it's anonymous, there's not a lot of figures on what works and who has recovered from it. And I think that's part of the problem. But self-help meetings, to me, are fantastic. If anybody's never been to one, it would behoove you. Make sure you go to an open meeting, because if you go to a closed meeting, you're identifying as a person with addiction of what that meeting is there for. So when you're looking at the list of meetings, go to a closed meeting. Many clients don't even know about self-help meetings. So to present them with that is awesome. Then there's individual counseling. There's client-centered. Reality therapy, that's the emphasis on the here and now. There's Gestalt, who's another famous from back in the days, who focuses on the person in the environment. He's about restructuring the perception of yourself to help you recover. There's RET, rational emotive therapy, where we try to minimize the person's self-defeating attitudes and replace them with realistic ways to view themselves. Now, there's a lot more methods of treatment. I'm going to give you a few more. There's group therapy. There's nothing wrong with group therapy. Some people are comfortable talking in group. Others are not comfortable. I learned early on that people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia don't do very well in group treatment. So keep that in your mind as you assess your own client. There's family therapy. Oftentimes the family does need to be involved, because it's not just the person, the addict, who's recovering. The family has to recover also from the damage that has been done to them, for them, with them. There's also the use of antabuse. And this has been around for a little bit, and what it does for people who have an addiction to alcohol, and what it does is it makes you sick. It creates a really unpleasant reaction to the alcohol you're drinking. It is a medically supervised treatment. You don't just go into a store and buy Antabuse, because it can have very, very serious interactions. But from my understanding, there have been some positive results with Antabuse. There's also, we've already touched on methadone and Suboxone. Those two are also methods of treatment. I'll share a story with you. I was working at the Alcoholism Council of New York, and we used to have, I think they called them silent auctions. We were raising money, you know, and Darryl Strawberry was the guest there. He was invited to be the guest. And if anybody knows Darryl Strawberry's history, you know that he relapsed several times. And he went into treatment several times. I took a picture with him, which I still have. And I wanted to talk to him because I felt that his problem was not him. His problem was the fact that he was looked at as this star. So people weren't even comfortable providing the right kind of treatment that he needed. And so I talked to him, and I remember saying, you know, Darryl Strawberry, I'm a fan of yours. And he gave me his book. I have it here, and he signed it. And I said, but you know what? I think something that's happening with you, why you keep going back to treatment, you keep saying it's alcohol, but you know it's cocaine. When are you going to face the reality of what you're using? And, you know, Darryl's clean now today. And I don't know, I mean, I don't consider myself any miracle worker, but sometimes someone has to carry that flashlight and help that person see. He kept going in for alcohol treatment. Well, that wasn't his problem. He was drinking, but his problem was cocaine. And he wasn't acknowledging that. He wasn't getting help for that. So that's my story about Darryl Strawberry. I don't have a lot more on recovery. I'm looking at time also, so I will open the floor to either Mr. Stolberg or any questions. I see Esther's hand again. Great. Do you want Esther first, or do you want to talk first, Mr. Stolberg?
Let Esther go, please.
Okay.
Thank you so much. You mentioned all these different 12-step programs, and you forgot to mention Al-Anon. I grew up with alcoholics, and I married an alcoholic who's been sober by the grace of God for 29 years. But what I didn't know at the time was how sick I was. I don't drink. How sick I was from somebody else's drinking. And in many ways, I was sicker than the alcoholic, because with the alcoholic, I can always point to the drink. I didn't have anything in my hand. So the denial for me was much deeper. And Al-Anon, for you guys out there, is for people who have lived with alcohol addiction. And there is Nar-Anon also for people who have lived with people that are addicted to other drugs. So I just wanted to put it out there. I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon, and it has made my life completely different. So I'm sorry I talk so much. But
fantastic. Thank you. And I agree. And I was going to throw in Nar-Anon if you didn't. So thank you so much. Yes. And that's for families of or friends of. And she's so right, because we don't realize how sick we become being with that person. Great. Thank you, Esther.
You're welcome.
There are questions out there for Ms. Haversham-Brown or Mr. Stolberg. You could type it in the chat. You can raise your hand. You can just come out with it, whatever you want to do.
I did want to ask a question. I'm sorry, before we wrap it up.
Go, Jess.
It goes to Miss Patricia. I was an adolescent addict. I started at 13, and I was a product of my environment, unfortunately. So it wasn't hidden from me. It was around me. I was very much aware of it. Now, my question is we see a lot of young addicts nowadays because it's a product of their environment. And because I've recovered and I've relapsed and I've recovered and I've relapsed. Now, I wanted to say, because you had mentioned something to the fact of, excuse me, I'm sorry. Okay. Something to the effect of, when you go to therapist, and they try to kind of just put you into this box, where I at first was not able to do the group therapy. I had to just do the one-on-one. I would literally have panic attacks sitting in group therapy because I could not sit here and express myself and voice my opinion and allow these strangers to know my information, because I was a recovering addict. So the trust issue was really what it was at that point. So as I went through the process of different treatment centers and different treatment centers and different different therapists and stuff like that, I've come to the realization where it's almost like once you've been labeled or once you have a diagnosis, it's almost like they go directly to that diagnosis and saying, okay, so this is what you are. So these are the things we're going to do for you. But nothing but as far as the aspects of your life are not taken into account. You know, I'm a mom. I have 2 kids. I go to school full time. They go to school full time. So it's a very, very difficult, and we're all doing it by ourselves. And now, especially with COVID, we're doing it from home. So who's to say that because my environment has changed so drastically that my mental state is not going to change? And because I've already been diagnosed with this label, it's like that's all is being looked at is that label, but the environment is not being touched on. And I find that very crucial when it comes to other students, because they, like I said, I was a young addict. I started at 13. So, and I'll be 40 next month. So I know the large span of my life where I've dropped the ball and had to recover and knew what I needed to do. But it was basically based on, because I knew what my trigger was. And not a lot of people know that.
You're right.
But understandably, what I'm seeing is that the youth is getting younger and younger when it comes to the addicts. And they're not being given the proper information, and they're not being given the proper direction, more so as to say, you don't have to do this. See, I was around it, so I thought it was okay. I felt like everyone else around me is doing it and nobody else is saying it's wrong. So why should I feel like it's wrong? And my subconsciously, it was like, okay, I'm just going to go with the flow because I'm becoming a product of my environment. And also touching base on, my dad was an addict. My dad was addicted to heroin. My mom has bipolar disorder. So I'm getting hit from both sides of the fence when it comes to these periods of addiction and the emotional part of it. But I had gone into another Zoom meeting where I had said it'll be a year, October the 1st, where my last attempt at life. And it's been a year since my recovery. And this happened in October, like I said, October the 1st of 2019. And now here I am almost a year later, and school saved me. Being able to throw all that energy and being able to throw all of that flow into school has saved me. And it's funny because Dean Say could tell you, she sees me everywhere. They see me everywhere. I'm in everything. I try to dip my hands into everything I possibly can to be busy. And it's not about doing too much, because I am OCD when it comes to time management. So I do know when to say I can't, or not right now, maybe at a different time. So at least that way I'm not bombarding myself or feeling like the mania and the anxiety is going to kick in when it comes to the mental state part of it. But I think that if I knew then what I know now, I think that a lot of, like I said, my adolescent, my adulthood would have been completely different, because I was not given that opportunity or that flow of direction to say, okay, listen, even though this is going on, you don't have to follow that. No one told me that.
I appreciate hearing you. You said a lot of good things. And guess what? You're doing an awesome job of taking care of yourself. You really are. You know what your triggers are.
Yes.
You're bringing that out. I have, and I'm hearing you and I listen and I'm really proud of you. I just want to say that.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you for sharing what you did. You didn't have a question. You had a testimony. Great.
It comes when it comes. And
That's okay.
This is,
That's all right. And each one teach one. That's great.
Exactly. Hey, the way I see it, the way I am and the way I speak and how I present my story, I feel like if I was able to touch one person, because you never know when somebody's going through something. You may not know when that person is going through that rough day and has been clean and sober and saying, I want to pick up a bottle, or I want to get that needle, or I need this drug to make me feel better. And if I can just present my story out to help that one person to say, you know what, I'm not going to do it, then my job is done.
Mission accomplished.
That's the way I look at it. It's
Beautiful.
not about saving everybody, but if I can at least have my story make one person say, you know what, not today, then that's what it's worth.
Each one teach one. That's what
Yes,
we go
ma'am.
with. Okay. Anything else? That was a nice ending to this. That was really, really special. I thank you, Ms.
Jessica.
Lopez.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's no one path to heaven. There's lots of different
That's right.
ways that things can be done.
Right.
Whatever works, and keep doing it. Even TCs, Patricia, I've known a lot of people that have gotten clean and sober through.
Yeah.
They've changed a lot.
Yes.
And
they have.
what may not work for another might work for others.
I've appreciated the comments. Mr. Stolberg, I appreciate you being right there by my side. Zoya, I appreciate you for inviting me. This has been awesome. I thank you all so very much.
We'd like to thank you all for tuning in to no doubt the heaviest episode of Virtual Cafe that we've ever done. We'd like to thank our special guests, Mr. Victor Stolberg. We'd like to thank Miss Patricia Haversham-Brown for joining us today. We appreciate your time and talking to our students. And we'd, of course, like to thank the greatest clinical director that our college has ever seen, Dr. Zoya McCants, for setting this up for us. Thank you, Dr. McCants, as always.
Yes. Thank you all. Take care.
We hope that you all stay safe and your families are doing well during this time. Thanks for tuning into Virtual Cafe. We will catch you on the next one. Take care.